My name's Graeme, and our other presenter is Mike. And where this all started was actually Mike worked at a Royal Valley tracking station back in the day, and Mike had some information about the celebrations happening in Canberra with all the trackers from the different tracking stations. And Mike said to me, "Would you like to come up, keep me company in Canberra?" I said, "Yes, please." So that's where that all started. And we went up to Canberra in July for the anniversary, and it was a very well organised weekend. And there were about 450 people at the venue, and they had excursions to Honeysuckle Creek and Titbinbilla, and we met Andy Thomas, and we've got a number of slides and a pictorial display to show you this evening about our experience. And we'll be talking about some of the communications in regards to the Apollo 11 trip to the moon. So that's what this evening will be all about. First of all, the conspiracy theorists were right. There are no kangaroos on the moon. That's faked. Those kangaroos aren't really there.
At least the shadows show.
Yeah, it's the shadows. You can see through them. So this was on the actual website of the anniversary celebration page. And
the Coke cans in the background of that one.
Coke cans? Basically, our trip started in the morning with an interview with Fiona Parker at ABC about Mike's experience at Royal Valley. So, Mike, would you like to perhaps stand up and elaborate on the interview and what you spoke about?
A couple of days beforehand, I was sitting at home and the phone rang, and Fiona rang and said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And I said, "Well, do you know who you're talking to?" And she said, "Well, I'm hoping talking to Mike Tobin." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Fiona from the ABC BAREC show." She said, "I believe you know a little bit about the Apollo events." And I said, "Yes, I do." She would like to come in and do an interview in the BAREC show. I said, "Yeah, okay, that'll be fine." And it just turned out that we were going up on the Friday, and the first lot that she had to fit us in for an interview was on the Friday, so we thought, hey, we'd just drop in there on the way as we go past. So that's what we did. And we just had a quick little talk about mainly the side of things with the measurements of the astronauts' biomedical condition, their heart rate, their respiration, and some rather astounding sort of figures as to what parameters they got to, way outside of what would be considered the normal. In fact, most people in this room, if they had figures that were anywhere near what they had for heart rate, would be rushed off to hospital straight away. Defibrillator wouldn't do any good. Yeah, so we had that. We wrapped that up and got going in the car and headed off towards Sydney. And we got a phone call not far out of Shepparton. And it was Tony Tardio from 3AW. And he said, "What are you guys doing?" We said, "We're on our way to Canberra to go to the thing." He said, "I want an interview with you for the Italian show." And I said, "All right, we'll stop in the car park in somewhere in Shepparton where it was quiet, and we can we'll set up and do it." The car park, the first car park we found was actually the council offices as you go into Shepparton. So I thought, that's fine, we'll park in there. And I didn't bother about paying any money or anything, just we're going to be gone before anybody caught up with us. So Tony Tardio rang back and we did the interview. And the interesting thing was that Tony was doing a show in Italian. So he's talking away in Italian, and in the middle of it he's a string of Italian dialogue, and then Michael Tobin, and then a bit more string of Italian dialogue, and Apollo 9, and Apollo 11.
And then Neil Armstrong.
And Neil Armstrong.
And the funny thing was, it was a funny experience for me because I'm driving along, we're listening to the program on the phone, it was all in Italian, and Mike turned to me with this horrified look on his face. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I don't think I'm going to be able to do this in Italian." I said, "No, I think he's going to do it in English." Yeah. So, we've actually got a link to where that interview is at the end. I can show you where the link if anyone wants to listen to it.
So before we even got anywhere near Canberra, we'd already had a couple of exploits as to what the weekend was going to hold in store for us. And yeah, you can go on.
Okay, so on the Friday evening, we're at the Australian National Museum in Canberra. And we all walked in and signed up, registered, and they gave us our own lanyards, and it was all very official, and there were about 450 people there. And The man at the lectern there at the moment, his name is Andrew Tink, and he was previously a politician in New South Wales. He actually wrote this book on Honeysuckle Creek. And as he said himself, he's probably no expert on the technical part of things, but it was probably more focused on the people involved in at Honeysuckle Creek. And indeed, there were 4 trackers there sitting at the front, telling us their experiences at Honeysuckle Creek.
He was very instrumental in getting funds made available for the work that was done at Honeysuckle to commemorate the 50th anniversary. Because of his contacts he had within the government, he was able to apply pressure and get some funding that was needed. They wouldn't have gone anywhere without that funding.
So it was very well organised, and they had video images of what actually occurred during the moon landing, and they explained everything from how the television pictures were relayed and when and from what station and so forth. Dr. Andrew Thomas was there. Andy Thomas, Australian-born NASA astronaut. He had a couple of missions on a couple of space shuttles, and also he spent some time on the Mir space station. So he did a very interesting talk, and we got to meet Andy, which was fantastic. It was really good. There were some really good highlights throughout the evenings. A gentleman there who does video casts on YouTube, and he was getting around the weekend videoing everything that was happening. And we've got a link at the end of the presentation if you wanted to take a photograph of that, of where to go on YouTube. Mike was very surprised and looked at this, and he said, "That's the mini-track console from Aurora Valley. That's the very console that was used at Aurora Valley that Mike was using in the 60s." He told the guy with the video camera, and of course the guy latched onto that and he said, "Oh, I'd love to do an interview. Do you want to tell us all about the console?" So Mike said, "Yeah, okay, no worries." So he asked Mike a lot of questions, and the funny thing was this guy kept on going and going and going and going with all these questions, which was great. We wanted to go and meet Andy Thomas and all this sort of thing. So after about 10 minutes, it seemed like, Mike sort of said, "Oh, well, I hope you got something out of that." He sort of had to move on because we wanted to finish and meet Andy Thomas. So it was a good experience, and this guy does a really good job of his videos. He goes right into detail with the technicality of things, and we've got the link to his YouTube videos at the end. So that was a really good experience to see the mini-track console, and to have Mike explain how it all worked.
Mini-track's a very interesting concept in that it's a tracking system for a stationary antenna. It's like a big phased array, and it looks at the phase difference between one end of the antenna and the other, and electronically steers it. It does its primary allocation of the...
Maybe you might be able to stand up the front and talk about this antenna close to the microphone.
It's a VHF helical array. It's all of the elements are all phased together, and they measure the phase relationship across each of the elements of it. And when they've got the phase exactly correct, and they know that that antenna is pointing straight at the satellite, the satellite starts to drift off one side or the other, then the dish will see that phase relationship change and automatically correct the thing. But that's only the primary function to get the satellite over the mini-track. The mini-track antenna is like the SKA, like the square kilometre array. It actually measures the phase difference at ends of the antenna and electronically points the antenna without physically moving it. It's a very interesting concept.
So as Mike was explaining the other day, some tracking consoles have trackballs on them, or joysticks, where they can track the actual satellite using the dish, whereas the mini-track didn't have a trackball, did it? Because it was it tracked the satellite, as Mike just explained, without moving the antenna.
With these satellites that Aurora was tracking, it sometimes passes as low as 12 minutes from horizon to horizon, so it's really moving. And if you're trying to track it, even with a joystick, it's pretty hard. With the trackball, you can just move your hand gently across it, and you can actually go backwards and forwards or sideways a little bit, and you get the feel of where the spacecraft is and follow it. We
got to meet Andy Thomas, and come hell or high water, Mike was going to meet Andy Thomas. There were a lot, and myself, of course. There were a lot of people there. There was this photographer that was constantly trying to get all these photographs of Andy Thomas. It was almost like she was priority and no one else. And the lady that was managing Andy said, "Oh, well, he has to go now. He has to go there. He's had a big day and all this sort of thing." Well, Mike was there. There's other people there. Mike was there, sort of shuffling through. We were going to meet Andy Thomas, come hell or high water, and we did. We got a photograph of us together. So
even though his minder wanted to get him home, he still had the time to spend 5 minutes or so with us.
And we spoke to him, and he was very, very calm and interested to talk to us, and so that was one of the highlights of the weekend, and that was on the Friday night. So we were stoked at the end of it.
We could have packed up the car and come home.
That was just one of the highlights. There's another really good highlight near the end of the presentation that we took away from the weekend that was absolutely wrapped as well. I'll explain that later on. So this is Andrew Tink. This was at Honeysuckle Creek. Once again, I thought, well, we probably would have just got there on a bus, got off the bus, walked around, and they probably would have said, "Oh, this is where this happened." But no, it was much more than that. There were hundreds of people there. It was really well organised. They had refreshments and drinks and tea and coffee, and that was all part of the actual lunch costs, and there was no further costs involved in any of the travel or anything like that. And they had a lot of dignitaries there. They were the dignitaries at the front. The other thing we're going to do also is explain a little bit about what lemons have to do with going to the moon in a minute. But anyway.
So the guy in the red jumper on the end there, John Saxton, he is almost single-handed responsible for the whole of the events that occurred. He's working on it for 2 years.
Yeah, no, they did a massive job.
He was the director in charge of Honeysuckle when it was operational for the
And one thing we have to take into account, these guys, these original trackers, like these are from 50 years ago, and these guys, they're not young, and their weekend that they put on and put together was incredible, and they would have been exhausted. So particularly with John Saxon and
John didn't surface until Wednesday. There wasn't a need.
He would have been exhausted, and they did a massive job. It was so official. It was almost like it was happening all over again. That was the US ambassador, Arthur B. Culverhouse Jr. And so even the US ambassador was there, and he gave a speech. And he said what a remarkable job the Australian tracking stations did back in '69. And how NASA appreciated our involvement. And it was a worldwide involvement with a number of countries.
See how the ground rises up behind the dignitaries there. After they'd finished all their talks and everything else, I was standing on that, heading up towards the antenna used to sit up over the top of that, and the American ambassador was standing there. I just went up to him and said, "Hi, how are you?" And he said, "I'm fine, thank you." And I had about a 10-minute chat with him. Nobody else there was no reporters trying to grab you or anything else. Having a natter for 10 minutes, and it was incredible.
Has anybody seen the movie The Dish? When the mayor introduced the ambassador to his wife, and so I was going to say is what's lemons got to do with going to the moon? I said to Mike, I'm going to introduce you to the ambassador. I'm going to say, "Ambassador, nice to meet you. This is Mike. He's the lemon." But we thought, we better not do that. So they had a few of the flags, Spanish flag, American, Australian, of course. They had a welcome to country as well. So there was some interesting Indigenous information about the area. So that was very interesting too. That was the representative from the Spanish consulate, and he was interviewed by television and radio, and so that was quite.
See how they've got you just at the start of the new display they put in with the one.
That's it. So they, on the day they actually kind of cut the ribbon on this display and unveiled it. They had it all covered up. They unveiled it, and it's one small step, one giant leap, and it's sort of cut out in the metal, and you can see through it as the sun shines through it. And Mike found a photo that was taken, I think, was it a couple of weeks after?
Yeah,
Was it?
last week.
Yeah, and that's it. Yeah, so that's only just recent. There was snow, and I'll tell you what, the weather was just absolutely beautiful. It couldn't have been any better. It was pleasant sitting outside. It was sunny, so we had some really good weather. The bus trip took us to Tidbinbilla. After it broke down, we unfortunately had a breakdown, but they quickly got us onto another bus. There are other buses involved, so we swapped buses. And so this is the dish from Honeysuckle Creek, which is at Tinbilla now. Did you want to explain something about?
Actually, it just disappointed me that you can't see it particularly well in this shot, but there's a tripod off the top of it that actually holds the sub-reflector, and then a waveguide that comes up and feeds the antenna. They've re-established a whole lot of it. I don't know whether they're going to finish it off or not, but they haven't got the tripod and the sub-reflector mounted on at the moment, so they may be just going to leave it like that as an ornament to the fact that it was used during the Apollo missions. They may make it complete. The Aurora Valley antenna got pulled down, and Lindsay Fox provided trucking to get it down to Tasmania. It's been reassembled for the University of Tasmania at one of their faculties there, and they're using it for space research at the moment. So it's good to see that at least something out of Aurora Valley didn't just get destroyed. And it's good to see this one's been saved, even if it's only just saved from the fact that people can come and have a look and say, well, that was the antenna that was used.
So has anybody been to Tidbinbilla? Definitely worth a visit. They've got a really good visitor centre there as well. We had a few years ago, we had a organised by a friend who lives in Canberra. We had in-house tour, a behind-the-scenes tour of Tidbinbilla, and it was fantastic. I mean, what they do at Tidbinbilla is just amazing, and a lot of people probably wouldn't even know what they do. I mean, they're part of the Deep Space Tracking Network for NASA, and they track all the probes that are out there. Like you hear about the Voyager probes and all these other probes. Tidbinbilla is actually part of all that. NASA rely on Tidbinbilla as one of the main tracking stations to track all these probes.
There's an app for your phone that you can get that will tell you what each of the antennas are tracking. Right at that moment.
Yeah. So
they did an enormous round of work on Pluto with Tidbinbilla.
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so these next couple of slides, Mike's going to stand up and explain a bit about the communications with the Apollo 11 mission and some of the frequencies. Yeah, so if you go, the other diagram is after this one. So yeah.
These are the ground stations, and each one of them have different tasks. There's radar, the receivers. They use tracking and telemetry to know how fast it's going and where it is exactly. This is shown as being the space segment, and then this is the Apollo module. VHF AM transmitter and receiver, VHF FM transmitter and receiver, the C-band transponder, S-band transmitter and receiver, HF single sideband, and VHF pulse one. Do you know why they use the HF? When they go through re-entry,
rescue,
and they get a blackout of all other communications except for HF. The heat of the spacecraft as it comes in through re-entry makes S-band, VHF, UHF communication just completely blocked out. HF gets through. They have aircraft flying around immediately below the re-entry point in circles on HF. They track them from here in Australia at the Doonside, just outside of Sydney. And you've got this log VRF antenna sitting there just going like that as the plane's flying around in circles immediately below the point. They do all of that for 12 minutes of communication. They can't bear to lose 12 minutes at that critical stage when they're in the middle of re-entry. Okay, next one.
Yeah, it's got some frequencies on it. And we should point out that this is not to scale, by the way.
You'll never get
The size of the moon's totally wrong. They had VHF, 259 to 79, 20 meg split, and duplex system for astronaut to astronaut communication on the surface. The same units went back. They used the lunar module as a repeater on the moon just to make sure they had absolute saturation. They had 2 gig links from that. One of the first things they did when they got to the moon was put a little 2 gig dish up on the surface of the moon, and that went straight back to Honeysuckle Creek. And Honeysuckle Creek also maintained links to the command. Now you see all of what they were talking about with getting the pictures, the right television pictures and everything else. They still had to maintain this link here as well as that one there. So you couldn't do it with one station because you can't point a dish at the surface of the moon to pick up this arrangement and also track the lunar module which was going in orbit around the moon and going behind it. So if they were taking the pictures from Goldstone, then they would be taking this data from Honeysuckle Creek. The only thing they couldn't do, they couldn't use Parkes as a backup for any one of these because they couldn't transmit from Parkes. They could only receive. That's basically just a block diagram of what they did. While they were doing this, they were out on the surface and then they put their all set packages in and they had their own frequencies, VHF frequencies, back to Earth, 137 megs and 140 meg transmit. Okay.
Yeah, so it's interesting, for those of us that like looking at frequencies, we can sort of relate to the frequencies that they were using when they actually went to the moon, which is quite interesting. What also struck me as interesting when I sort of started looking at these frequencies is that they were using frequencies up on 2.2 gig. I've always associated those frequencies with modern technology, more of a modern technology, But just back in 1969, they were actually using those frequencies back then. That was pretty amazing for 50 years ago. And no doubt, than the whole Apollo space program. Yeah.
To send the man to the moon.
Yeah.
They had a clock, and every station around the world that was in the Manned Space Flight Network was locked to that clock. They would actually fly out before each mission with a super constellation, which had a version of that clock on board, and they would put that into a vehicle on the runway at Canberra Airport. They would drive out to the station. They would actually calibrate the clock at the station to make sure that it was on Houston time, and so the whole of the network was on exactly the same time, down to a matter of microseconds.
And no doubt there would have been a lot of radio communication technology developed further from going to the moon with what would have been no doubt cutting edge technology back then.
I said microseconds, and today we look at our cellular phones with a nanosecond accuracy. So we've improved immensely from what they had, but that was what they said as a standard back then. Yes.
Right. Could you hear that voice link between the two astronauts? Back on Earth?
Yeah.
Yep. Thought you'd be able to.
We had a 26 metre dish.
Just they're very probably milliwatt or so they'd be 1 or 2. Between the two of them, would they?
The power pack for their their life support systems was 5 watts. So what percentage of that 5 watts was actually transmit power, I don't know, but I imagine it would be pretty damn small.
This is at the Sunday lunch, and when we arrived at the Sunday lunch on our table, we were given this nice commemorative menu, and on the back there, nice commemorative photograph that we can put in a frame of some of the tracking stations. It was the luncheon reunion, and the date was at the Canberra Southern Cross Club. And we're also given a few bits and pieces. There was a Apollo 11 coaster, Australian Space Agency book, and there was also this nice commemorative pamphlet of Honeysuckle Creek when we got to Honeysuckle Creek. So they put a lot of thought into the whole weekend, and they had a few large screens scrolling through a lot of the images from the Apollo 11 landing tracking station tracking stations, videos and audio, and as they were moving through the launch procedures.
That's actually Parks.
Yeah, yeah. So I took a few shots of those, and then they also had. They actually did they did a countdown to when the actual exact time was for when Armstrong stepped on the moon, and then they played the actual TV footage, and they had it labelled as to where it was actually coming from and explained it as it went. And so that was initially from Goldstone. In the US, of course, it was upside down to start with until they flicked the switch.
Yeah. And this is the ladder going up to or down to the limb, whichever way you want to point it. Yeah, the wrong way up.
So that was the first image, and then they flicked it up the right way. That was still from Goldstone. And they also had the communications playing, and some of the communications were, of course, from the Australian tracking stations, from the guys that were actually there in Canberra at this luncheon, right? So some of the voices were on the recording, and they had their names that come up on the screen of who said what and when. And that was quite fascinating, considering they were there part of the weekend, and their names were on the screen, and their voices from 50 years ago were on the actual communications. Like that was
Mike Dunn did most
Mike Dunn, yeah.
Comms,
Yeah.
back to.
So-
They allocate one person in Houston, and they call him the
Capcom,
Capcom.
yeah,
And
capsule communication.
he is the only person in Houston who is allowed to talk to the spacecraft direct. The senior officers in each of the tracking stations are allowed to, and they set up the call beforehand, and then once they've got solid communications, they hand it over to Capcom and he tells them whatever they want to do.
And then they flicked over to Honeysuckle Creek. That was the TV images from Honeysuckle Creek. And when Neil Armstrong said, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," you sort of heard the whole room erupted in applause and clapping. And like I say, it was like it just happened again. And it was quite emotional. Everybody clapped at the same time when he walked on the moon. And
Definitely not HDMI, is it?
no, it was definitely not HDMI. And then was about 15 minutes later. 8 minutes was it? They flicked over to Parks. So as we know from the movie, The Dish was a great movie, but it wasn't all Parks that relayed the TV as we know.
I'll show you something. If you have a look at Parks' antenna, it's got a main lobe that's like that. But because of the actual construction of it, this point here comes so close to the ground that you can't get this down any lower than 30 degrees. So what they were actually using was a sublobe of the antenna. And they can actually get that down low enough to have a look at the spacecraft, but they've just got considerably less gain than the main lobe, and that was why there was such just a hassle about whether it would be Honeysuckle or whether it would be Goldstein or whether it would be Parks that would actually be getting the information. Parks tried to get it, but they were only in the minor lobe, they weren't in the major lobe.
So Parks couldn't see the moon until a while later, but Honeysuckle Creek, because of its antenna configuration, could see it earlier than Parks. So
in fact, Parks has been made bigger now. They've put an extra part around the reflector on it, and it can't get down below about 40 degrees now. It's 30 degrees during then, but because the size of the dish actually has been extended out here, it elevates the area above the ground that you can actually point the dish down at.
yeah, so they went through some of these video images. That was a shot of the back of the room just to convey how many people were there, and they had a couple of big screens conveying all these images. They also had a couple of video messages, one from Fred Hayes, and he was the backup lunar module pilot for Apollo 11, and he was a lunar module pilot for Apollo 13. He gave a video message to all the trackers at Canberra and everybody there that was at the luncheon. One of the things that he said was that one of the contributions that we made to the Apollo 13 mission, of course, which we know didn't make it to the moon, but they amazingly got their astronauts back, was that because of our sensitive antenna systems with our tracking stations, they could use low power to transmit back to Earth. And of course, as you know, they had to try and budget their power consumption and use as much lower power as they could. So they were able to use low power, and he actually basically said because of our sensitivity of our antennas, they were able to use low power to help with help conserve their power.
So Tibinbilla had 2 backup transmitters and 4 backup receivers throughout the whole of the Apollo mission. So at any time that the spacecraft or the moon was high in the sky and they went to Tibinbilla's equipment, they would have really strong signals.
There was also a video message from Gene Kranz, the mission controller, during the mission, and of course we know Gene Kranz by that white jacket that he used to wear at mission control. He's sort of been portrayed in movies, and so he provided a video message as well, thanking all the trackers and the Australian contribution to the Apollo 11 moon landing. So that was really good to see that. They got all the trackers up on the stage to take their photographs. So that was a pretty good moment for them all. And when you consider like the age of these guys that were involved, you know, this is not going to happen again. There'll be a lot that won't be around in 10 years' time. I mean, there's probably a lot that aren't around now that were around then too. But so it was quite significant to be part of the 50th. One thing they're actually doing is they're going to put a commemorative plaque somewhere in Canberra. They're looking for a place to put it, commemorative boards, commemorating the involvement of the people involved at the Canberra tracking stations. So they're working with local authorities and working out a place to put these commemorative boards, which will be really good.
A plaque put on the wall of OGC's, or ex-OGC's, now Telstra's building,
right.
At Paddington in Sydney,
yeah.
to acknowledge the contribution that they that was put on in the last couple of days.
Oh, that's just my table with a few of the guys at my table. There was one of the guys was an amateur radio operator, and there were a couple of guys from an astronomy club in Queensland. So there was a whole gamut of people involved. The majority of people, I think, were connected with the original trackers. They might have been family or friends or so forth. There was also a big weekend over at Parks as well for the 50th too. You know, I'll tell you what, that's not Neil Armstrong, but you know who that is. So they had a guy dressed up in an astronaut suit, and he was the MC. He came out and pretended to sort of walk on the moon at the very start of it, and that was a really good touch to it. So they had a bit of fun with it as well. John Saxon on the right there that Mike was talking about before, that was one of the principal organisers of the weekend. That's one of Mike's ex-colleagues, Neil, isn't it? Neil?
Neil Carlos.
Yeah.
He and I worked together in Doonside and HF station for many years, and he now runs the Veterans magazine for OTC.
One of the other highlights of the weekend was touching a piece of moon rock. We actually touched a piece of moon rock. I knew there was a piece of moon rock somewhere in Canberra that you could touch, so I got on the net and I looked it up, and it was on the Sunday night, and we're going to leave the next morning on Monday morning. I said, hey Mike, before we leave, we're going to touch a piece of moon rock. Turns out the Geoscience Centre was probably about 1 kilometre up the road from where we were staying, and I didn't know exactly where it was to start with. I realised this is where the moon rock was, and it's one of 11 pieces of moon rock, of touchstones that you can actually touch in the world, and it's the only one in the Southern Hemisphere, and it's the Geoscience Centre in Canberra, and it's worth a look there. It was actually from 1972 Apollo 17 mission, and 3.8 billion years old, on loan from NASA. So now we can say we've touched a piece of moon rock, and that's a close-up of it there. It's not overly big. It's only about that big, and that's sort of in this glass basin, and that's the Geoscience Centre in Canberra. They've got fossils, they've got minerals and rocks, and you name it, they've got it. And it's, if you're ever in Canberra,
was in there. What is it?
I won't comment on that. So yeah, it's definitely worth a visit if you're ever in Canberra, the Geoscience Centre. It's very, very educational. That's for sure.
I didn't know the Heidi made up the bed in the spare room.
She might be driving home tonight, do you think? There are some commemorative things that have come out as far as coins and stamps. That's one of the first aid covers. It's got the 4 stamps that have been released to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing. You can get them from Australia Post. That's the other first day cover with a footprint on the moon. And they've also released a couple of coins, a $1 coin commemorating Honeysuckle Creek Tracking Station, and the 5-cent coin with the footprint on the moon. I believe that's the first time that they've actually ever put a commemorative picture on the 5-cent coin. So they're available from Australia Post, and there are a few other things available too, medals, and this is a special stamp pack. You can get another, like a smaller basic stamp pack, but also this is actual special stamp pack with the stamps in it and a whole heap of information on the moon landing. Also available from Australia Post. So there's also a joint Australian and American issue of a couple of coins. I think it's a $5 Australian coin and a $half US coin you can get. They're quite a bit more expensive, but so there's those as well. Thank you very, very much for listening. Have you got anything else you want to say, Mike?
No, I think we covered just about the whole of it.
All right. There's some links there. So the interview with Tony Tardio, that's the website there. Look for that file. That's the direct link. And the Royal Valley Control console and other videos are available at YouTube. At EEV Discover. That's the guy that does these YouTube videos, EEV Discover. That's
This is a fantastic site if you want to have a lot of information. That's now gone because the station isn't there anymore. There's pictures of the station during construction, videos on getting to it when the weather was not as favourable as what it could be. So that's a very good site, that one.
Yeah, so a lot of information. We'll show you a couple of books that Mike has. Now, this is actually about. It's interesting because Aurora Valley is probably one of the tracking stations that is not widely known, not like Honeysuckle Creek or Parkes, but there's also Aurora Valley, and this really big, thick book's been written by Philip Clark. And so, who was Philip Clark?
He was my shift controller.
Right.
I actually lived with him and his wife for a couple of weeks while I was trying to get a flat in Canberra when I first went down there. Just another tech like me, except he was running further up the ladder than I was. He was the shift controller.
So that's a really good book. I'm actually going to get this book myself as well. A lot of technical detail in there, and explains heaps more about tracking stations, particularly Royal Valley. And there's another one, Fallen Astronauts. So Colin Burgess and Kate Doolan. And that
I did a talk for the Australian Astronomical Society, the group based in Melbourne. It was one of the other anniversaries. I think it's the 40th or 45th, I'm not sure.
it might have been the 45th, I think.
And Darren Hinch was there because of his involvement with it. He signed the inside of the cover of that. But it basically talks about the astronauts that we've lost during the program, the 7 in each of the space shuttle disasters, and of course the 3 that died on the launch pad with Apollo 2.
Apollo 1.
Are you correcting me? Yeah. Go and have a look in your books. It's Apollo 2.
Apollo 1, wasn't it, Chris?
Apollo 1.
Yeah. And Darren Hinch was also there, as Mike just said, and he was also at the that Space Association one. And Darren did an interesting speech, and he commented on the fact that later on, when he got back to his accommodation, he had bruises on his legs from the vibration of the table from when the Saturn V took off. A lot of vibration, and so he conveyed his experience of, because he covered it for a radio station at the time. The other book was, that one I just mentioned before, by Andrew Tink. Is available as well. All in all, it was a great weekend. So thanks very much for coming this evening, and thanks for listening.
I think I heard somewhere on the radio the last couple of days that IMAX Theatre in Melbourne have got something happening at the moment.
Yeah, I can tell you all about that. I actually met the archival producer of the Apollo 11 documentary, the new documentary, Stephen Slater. They had him at the Ballarat Observatory. He was going to do a talk, and I'm a member of the observatory, and they rang me up and said, "Oh, we need someone to drive him to the airport. Would you like to do that?" So, yeah, okay. So went down, we met him, and he did a talk, and then we all went to the Regent Theatre in Ballarat and sat with Stephen Slater, the archival producer of the documentary, and watching it with him there with us. Mike and I went to IMAX Theatre also to see it. And definitely worth seeing it on a big screen. Yeah. And what they had is they had the 70mm archive film from the Apollo missions, and particularly Apollo 11, of all the mission control footage and just general footage from the time. And it was never really sort of been used before, and the quality is incredible. They scanned...
The thing that got me about it was that we've all seen the shots taken from across the lagoon of the launch and listened to the roar of the rockets and everything else. Most of that's been shot in Super 8, and this stuff was 70mm, and it was just, it was almost like conventional television and HDMI.
Yeah.
The difference in the quality was absolutely...
So they got access to all this original footage. NASA gave them thousands of hours of communications recordings, and they had to, of course, back then, of course, the film didn't contain any audio. So they had to match up thousands of hours of this audio to the parts of the film they wanted to use for the documentary. And that was a challenge in itself. But not only that, the timing of the audio was out, because as Stephen explained, for some reason or another, when they re-recorded the audio on a tape machine they apparently had to rebuild, there was a warble, some sort of warble with the audio, and that put the timing track out because it didn't match up where the audio was. They had to fix that. And then they had to extract the audio that they needed from the recordings to use in the film and match it all up. So
and apparently a lot of that film archive never been seen before.
Yeah, it's never really been used, and a lot of it was of also like candid shots of people on the beach, waiting for the launch. And things like that, and it's priceless, because it was like the quality is so good. It was like it was shot yesterday, but it's going back 50 years, and even that in itself was quite amazing. The other thing that Stephen was doing, he's been working for NASA, and I drove him to the airport the next morning, so I had him captured in my car asking all these questions for it. It was great. And I said, "What did you do for NASA?" And he said, "Well, you know how they've recently revamped the original mission control as it was 50 years ago. Well, he was part of that. He helped them restore mission control as it was exactly 50 years ago.
Rebuilt the whole of the control room.
Yeah, right down to soft drink cans and ashtrays and bits and pieces that were there. And from what I've read, in actual fact, Chris gave me an article that I read about that, and it's like, they say if you're there, it's like being there 50 years ago and all the mission controls have just walked out for a break and they're going to come back. And so this Stephen Slater, the archival producer, he helped them also put some video images together of the film at the time that they had in the control room and when it was played and all the sequences of that. So so he helped them redo that.
One of the things that came out of that got me remembering the IMAX was that it's not just one room. You think you see a shot of mission control and it's one room that's got that heaps of screens and everybody's got their own little tasks to do. But they came back from that and they go into the next room. They came back from that and go into the next room.
Yeah.
There's about 7 or 8 different
Yeah.
layers of rooms.
There's-
that are
and
absolutely just full.
And there's banks of consoles, console after console after console, banks of them as the camera moves along. And with each person, not only just one person, but sometimes 3 or 4 people sitting behind these consoles. And that was all behind the scenes, behind mission control.
You get a little
so-
Main control,
Yeah,
the whole pile of people
Yeah.
backing him up.
yeah. Incredible, absolutely incredible. Thousands of people. And every,
They had the 1202 and the 1201 alarms.
yeah,
Well, that went back to the control rooms behind the controller, and he knew that particular controller knew he had a list somewhere because he'd been told by Gene Krantz to make a list, get together, because they had the problem crop up in training of all the alarms that they could get, and the bloke in the back room knew immediately and told him, you know, that's
Yeah.
what it is.
that was quite amazing.
And then Aldrin worked out what was causing the 1202 alarm.
Mm.
Because they had switched a switch that they hadn't done in any practices. They'd switched it, and when they put their ground radar on at about 2,000 feet up, suddenly the computers were overloaded.
Mm.
And you can, the BBC did a podcast called 13 Minutes to the Moon, and it's the last 13 minutes where they used powered flight down onto the moon from 50,000 feet up, and that's all they had, the fuel to get from that 50,000 feet up to down on the moon. And in 12 episodes they go through it, and he interviews a number of the controllers and what have you, and he explains what all the technical jargon they're talking about is, and at the finish, the last episode, he goes through and runs the whole 13 minutes without a break. And that way you understand it. Because I mean, when I listened to it as a teenager, I didn't understand one iota of what they said until I said they were on the moon. You know, the eagle has landed and
It always amuses me, the hype that's made about them almost running out of fuel. What would have happened if they'd run out of fuel? They would have had a hard landing on the surface of the moon. They weren't going to go anywhere else.
No,
That was
but
all-
what they would have had to have done was launched off their bottom pad to go back up.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Well, there's a lot of discussion as whether Neil would have done that or whether he would have just taken a hard landing and we're here now and we're going to, go down.
yeah.
Risk it, yeah.
Yeah.
They must have been remarkable people to do that.
Well,
Like,
they fell the last 3 feet.
just
Collins was...
yeah.
I've met all 3 of them. Collins was very down to earth, sort of, I've got a function to do. I'm going to be sitting up there in the command module, going round and round and round waiting for them. Buzz was gung-ho, very gung-ho.
Yeah.
And Neil was what you see is what you get.
Yeah.
Very, very...
Cool, calm and collected.
Yeah.
Very intelligent, extremely intelligent.
You think of some of the early explorers that,
It's hard to
through the
believe
world
that someone
and
that
compare it
has
to
that
them.
amount of knowledge
Yeah.
inside their head.
Well, incredible.
And thousands of things had to go perfectly right for it to
Yeah.
all happen. If one thing had gone wrong,
Yeah.
that was the amazing part about the whole thing.
Someone did a calculation, said that if 1% of the components on a Saturn rocket were to fail, it would be over 1 million components that would fail for 1%.